There's a type of YouTuber that has risen up over the last few years that makes jokey videos dissecting their playthroughs of niche games and retro titles of note. Some of them are really good. I subscribe to them and obsessively watch everything they put out. Whether they start the channel to make fun of these older titles or whether they're completely serious about playing them, eventually they all come round to the same idea. Hey, this old game is a lot better than I gave it credit for. I'm having fun. The same thing happens to ironic streamers. So it's not just the realm of YouTube either. And some players become so smitten with a game or game type that their channel will exclusively cover it. Like how I should have pivoted into covering Doom or Fallout content instead of stubbornly sticking to my DOS gaming roots. It betrays a well-known fact shared among the community. Certain games have a startling longevity. The most obvious of these is Doom. Doom was released in 1993, which means it will probably have turned 30 before this video is out. Happy birthday, Doom! It's still being played by millions of people. The contrarians can wag their fingers and say, yeah, Lawnie, big deal, that's just one isolated incident. Most games from the DOS era aren't played at all these days. Most games from any era aren't played at all these days. What makes these games special is that unlike others from their time period, when they're being played, they're usually not being played because of the nostalgia or historical curiosity, like a clutch of console games. They're being played because they're still the best in class after all this time. Nobody was playing Space War or Eliza or Noughts and Crosses in the mid-90s on their brand new DX2. They were considered obsolete, historical curiosities, and representative of a different time when gaming was simpler and not as good. Obviously, I can't tell you without question that games from the 2010s onwards are going to be dropped like a sack of potatoes, because I'm not Nostradamus. It hasn't happened yet. We're going to have to wait until the 2040s, if we make it that far. What I can do is cherry pick some Steamcharts stats for you, from various hyped indie darlings. Remember Braid? About 13 people play that a month now, and that's the same for most of them. 11 for VVVVV, 75 for Limbo, 94 for Super Meat Boy. There are a few exceptions like FTL and the remake of The Binding of Isaac, but for the most part it's less than 100 players for games that are a decade and change old. Yet if you look at DOS gaming, it's similar or worse with the numbers. So why can I so confidently state that it's in a better place than indie gaming from a decade ago? Because the vast majority of people playing these games aren't doing it through Steam, so the number isn't quantifiable. A subsection of players is competing favourably against the best that indie gaming had to offer us back then. It's not just the indies though. The numbers might be a bit bigger, but the effect remains the same in AAA gaming. There are 97,000 people playing the latest Call of Duty game on Steam. How many are playing the next highest Call of Duty game, Black Ops 2 from 2015? 5,000. It's not even the most recent one. The rest of them? A few hundred players tops. The drop-off is absolutely crazy. These games may as well have not even existed. Insert shameful condemnation of the gaming industry practices here. Nobody's going to remember or play the 14th iteration of Call of Duty in the 2040s. But there will be some games from that era that will be remembered. Remember how I mentioned Fallout? There were 4,000 people playing 2010's New Vegas the month of writing this. Not because it was a bestseller, but because it still is a great game with longevity and an amazing modding community. The ever biggest games from that year? Barely cracking the hundreds. A remake of a game from the 70s has 73 players this month, despite its steep price. A remaster of two mid-90s Westwood DOS games is holding steady with 1,400 monthly players. And those brilliant games with almost no players, the likes of TIE Fighter and XCOM, nobody's playing them, right? Wrong. They have thousands of players playing outside the Steam ecosystem. It's difficult to get stats, but the latest TFTC version was downloaded about 5,000 times. Commander Genius, an interpreter of a DOS platforming series from the 90s, was downloaded over 1,000 times since November of last year. And as I'm always keen to point out, DOSBox had 23,000 downloads this week, just from SourceForge alone. I've always maintained if you give your DOS game quality of life improvements that people will come flocking, but that's not always the case. The price has to be right too, as evidenced by the recent Chasm the Rift remaster, which is averaging about 2 players a month after asking nearly 20 quid for it. The real issue for modern games developers is when a game from their past continues to outperform their modern efforts critically, to a point where it steals the potential player base for the newer titles. Halo's Master Chief Collection has more players than Halo Infinite. Age of Empires 2 has more players than Age of Empires 3 and 4 combined. Postal 2 has 10 times the players of Postal 4. Sure, these are exceptions to the rule. In many cases, the more modern game will be played more, but a large part of that appeal is because it's the latest thing, rather than it being any better than what came before. As soon as something more modern rears its head, either by the company's own doing or from one of their competitors, they'll start losing player base fast, and having its predecessor end up with more players than it happens more often than you'd think. Star Wars! How many Star Wars games from the last 10 years are in Steam's most played as of 2023? 3. Every other game is at least 12 years or older, with most of them coming from the early to mid 2000s. In the last 5 months, the 1.3 upgrade for TIE Fighter Total Conversion has had about 5,000 downloads, and that's just the people up to date with the latest version. There were 28,000 flying 1.0, 9,000 on 1.1, 7,400 on 1.2. This means that the core group of players would still be enough to make it the most played Star Wars game on Steam, if the mod could be launched through Valve's platform. Your big budget EA titles with over 1,000 developers are fighting a losing battle on PC against an MMO from 2011, an RTS from 2007, some RPGs from the early 2000s, and 12 people from a modding community for a 1994 DOS game in a 1999 space combat sim. My favourite statistic while browsing through these Steam charts: the biggest sports game in the world, EA's FIFA 23, is currently being outperformed by a free-to-play zombie game made by a single 16-year-old 9 years ago. But then I shouldn't be too surprised, since the best-selling game from the last 20 years was made by 2 people. With the resources on hand, these studios should be losing out to fan remakes and indie games. But they are, and we all know exactly why. You can't buy passion, you can't buy heart. And the practices implemented by these companies and their board-appeasing financial decisions, instead of just giving players what they want, has led to a world where people are looking back at the games from the past and realizing that the reason players like me are sticking to their guns and repeatedly telling people that they're better is because they are. The onus should be on big developers to find those few remaining creative masterminds and bankroll them, a strategy that a certain company called Valve employed to great effect. I've met the modern-day Lawrence Holland. I know the next Peter Molyneux or Drew Capshirin is out there, but they're sat in ordinary jobs instead of being given teams and the financing to bring their vision to life. And while that continues to happen, you're going to have to look further and further back with each passing year in order to find the games with real longevity. With all the promotion in the world, all the media telling you that modern gaming is the best it has ever been, and a ludicrous budget to force its way into your eyeballs, it's the breakout games made by one random person, or the classics crafted by a small team back in the 90s that have the true staying power. And a huge number of those titles all came out on that one system, DOS.